Hi, everyone. My name is Chenai Chair, Senior Program Officer for Africa Innovation Mozilla Foundation. Thank you so much for having me today. I am just going to start sharing my screen and talk through artificial intelligence. Right. So thank you so much for having me for Center for Financial Inclusion. Today, I will be talking about trustworthy AI for financial inclusion, as this has been Mozilla's theory of change and focus. And by way of introduction, I'm Chenai. I'm based in Southern Africa, mostly in Harare, Zimbabwe, where I come from, a place that taught me what it means to be digitally financially included when the banking system was failing, 2008, 2009, and there was innovation around mobile money driven by a mobile network operator that allowed for people who were based in the diaspora to actually be able to send funds to their families who were based in Zimbabwe, where it was difficult with the banking system because there wasn't a currency, there were sanctions. And so for me, I come from that experience place of what it means to be financially excluded, and then finding digital financial solutions for you to be part of the process. So thank you for the Center for Financial Inclusion for providing this definition, because this frames how I think about financial inclusion and the way in which artificial intelligence can be seen as part of the solution. To be financially included means that there's someone who isn't able to access the systems that allow for a person to have access to finances, to be banked, to have access to credit, because at times they may be undocumented. We know a majority of the time it's women, particularly from low income, low education households, were often financially excluded. Historically, it was policy that actually led to the exclusion of women and groups together with children from having access to financial solutions. Up until this point, with the current crisis that we have in the world, there is actually people who become displaced migrants who are unable to be financially included because they don't have the right documentation. Not that they don't have documentation completely, but they don't have the right documentation. These are now people then who are also unable to access of services at affordable prices and have to find a way to sneak into the system to access the resources that are there. And oftentimes it's not convenient for them to actually be able to access these financial solutions because they don't have the right documentation, such as a recognized ID card. And also with dignity, where we find that sometimes, once again, referring to my experience as someone who was financially excluded, the experience of having to send money through third-party systems and just not being sure if you're going to have access to it, but this is the money that you relied on as a livelihood service. So then this is just that recognition that financial inclusion should be for all people so that they can have access to a full suite of services that are at quality level and affordable and are convenient. Because I think the worst experience in life is always having to pay 20% more when you're simply trying to access a service, but because of who you are and your identity and not having access to resources and life circumstances, you become excluded from a mainstream of services. Oftentimes, like I started my story by talking about the digital hope that comes with the hope that comes with technology. We've moved from a place where technology is often seen, well, I'm hoping we're moving from a place where technology is often seen as a silver bullet, where we've seen technology being, the hope around it is that it can, particularly artificial intelligence, it can provide solutions for financial inclusions that are assumed to be efficient. Because I think I was reading an article this morning that was talking about trying to process refugee migrants' access to financial services and the amounts of data that are there that make it a lengthier process. And so then when you take the human out of the loop and use an artificial intelligence system, the idea and the hope is that you're actually going to provide a fair assessment. You're going to minimize bias in the lending or the access to the resources. You're going to provide financial advice. There's actually quite a number of tools and resources around financial literacy, financial advice and credit schemes that have been brought forward because of technology. So technology filling the banks of traditional banking systems, the knowledge gaps of traditional banking systems by actually providing solutions that can be accessed on a mobile device, that can be accessed on a social media platform, on the advice that you need around finances, and breaking down that barrier where you needed a certain amount of money for you to be able to access a financial advisor, for example. But now the idea is, how do we provide financial solutions for agriculture farmers or pastoralists who may not be able to access physically a banking center because of their location? And so this can all be done, for example, on a mobile device. And also to minimize fraudulent activities. The story that I was saying of sending money with a third party bus driver across country, obviously there are some issues that can arise from that. But then the idea of having an artificial intelligence system or a mobile solution or digital service solution is around that idea that you can minimize the risk that is associated with being able to then have access to the technology, by having access to technology, particularly AI. So there is this hope that is premised that when we improve on the digital solutions that are there, it can also impact in the way in which that allows for financial inclusion. But dare I say that there are actually harms that we need to think about when it comes to making use of artificial intelligence or any other digital solution in actually addressing tech. So you'll see the slide was actually developed by work from the image that I've shared there, but Privacy International, where they were looking at micro-lending app solutions in Kenya, for example, and this was about 3 years ago. And these had risen up as a boom in response to the reality of mobile money being a big financial inclusion factor in Kenya. And also the fact that this was a much more easier way to access financial loans. So yes, the technology had worked in providing and lowering the barriers to access. But the issue around that was actually that there was just an increased privacy invasion, with people just not being aware of how much information was being collected about them that would then shape the way that they interacted with these platforms. There were also reported cases of family members of people who had borrowed money being reached out to by these small loan companies to then say, can you make your family member pay the loan that was there? And that intimidation also. So the impact this all has in terms of like the access to information that is gathered. Then once again, the lack of transparency. If you look at this, it's not explained in the terms of conditions that actually this is the amount of information that is taken for one to determine if they can have access to financial services. And then also digital extractivism. We actually have seen cases, and particularly again, and in Kenya, through WorldCoin, where people were donating their iris biometric information so that they could get access to some kind of like financial payback. And that for me is kind of like a signaling of what happens when you've got a tech solution that aims to then say, we're going to give you money, and then all we're just doing is collecting data in the context of high levels of poverty and high levels of unemployment, which then leads people to be willing to give up their data, because at the end of the day, it's like, well, at least I can get food on the table. And then also emerging bias from the systems. There was actually an article that was written by someone who is a business person, an engineer in South Africa, who happens to be of Indian descent, and also a woman who was indicating that she was rejected to have access to a bank loan by the system that they use because there wasn't enough data due to the apartheid and colonial history of South Africa that showed that women of color, Black women were actually good creditors. So in the end, she couldn't access the financial service that was available, although she had the resources and the means. So that's the extent of when we put in technology into the system, the bias that emerges and the harms that occur that we need to be cognizant of whenever we're putting forward technological solutions. And so Donna Haraway talks about, and she's one of my favorite feminist authors, who talks about technology, that oftentimes the people who create technology see themselves, technological financial solutions, often see themselves as objective. They are looking at the world from nowhere as if they hold this God's eye view. And then what happens is solutions that are developed actually ruin people's lives. And this is an example of how financial exclusion is exacerbated for people who are already on welfare services who all of a sudden get flagged by the system for fraud. So again, that double-edged sword of, well, we have tech so that we can minimize fraud, but in reality, the people that are getting flagged are actually the most vulnerable groups. And this is a story shared about a woman who had actually come from surgery and was now arguing with the welfare officer to actually say, I qualify for the system, although the algorithm had said this was a fraudulent practice. So that raises the harms that are associated with the technology and why we need to be cognizant of what we're building and employ trustworthy AI. So Mozilla, as I pointed out, has been championing trustworthy AI. And when we talk about trustworthy AI, our argument is that, when you create trustworthy AI products, it's not only ethically agent, but it can also pay off in company profit and customer value. Because at the end of the day, we exist in a world that requires business models. We cannot consistently rely on a developmental paradigm for financial inclusion solutions. There also has to be a business case and a use case for people to actually take up the solutions. And when it's done in a way where it's trustworthy, you're more likely then to have solutions that are used and improved upon because people are making use of them. So what we mean by trustworthy AI, it's really centering that human choice, the human agency at the end of the day, allowing users to have control over the AI, particularly how it works, and making informed choices about if and how they use AI. Because the most important thing when we talk about people who are excluded is we can't look at being excluded as like you have no choice or no say, and the importance around human dignity into the system. There's also need to have that agency and choice. So for us, trustworthy AI allows for this agency and choice. And it's also about accountability. The basis of actually holding the people who develop the solutions in an accountable manner so that there isn't the repercussion of misuse or irresponsible deployment. As I was talking about the case of the World Clear Vision, about people who just sharing their biometric information, but there wasn't any regulation. And when there was regulation that was called for by the Kenyan government, there was a reluctance because the argument was, well, we're giving people money, but there wasn't transparency around how that data was actually going to be used. And so this is really important, particularly for companies and businesses, to be clear about what it is that they're using the data for, and that they can be held accountable instead of simply taking away information through digital extractivism and data. And data is part of us. It's not just something that exists separately, and then being able to say, we've got, this is the implementation and this is how it's done. So Mozilla's trustworthy theory of change, I've just highlighted some aspects around it, which I think is valuable when you're thinking about financial inclusion, AI solutions for financial inclusion. It's really around, developing products and services that meet the needs of the people and markets that are previously ignored. And that's, an aspect around financial exclusion, that this is a group of people who there wasn't a business case for, and they're usually ignored in that system. Citizens who are actually increasingly and willingly able to pressure the companies to hold them accountable. So that accountability is about people who are informed with the knowledge, who are actually able to actually hold companies accountable in terms of the solutions that they're putting forward, regardless of your status. Even if I'm a refugee, I still want to understand what is the solution you're implementing to ensure that I have access to resources. For the people who make the policies and the regulations to have access to the data and the necessary expertise to scrutinize the trustworthiness of the solutions. We've seen so many collaborations between governments and private companies where tech solutions are being offered for financial inclusion. But the question around it is, where's the data going? How is it trustworthy? What happens when there's a data breach? And then that lack of the necessary policies in place. And then again, transparency being a key feature that's also part of the solution, because at the end of the day, these are some of the tenets that are in outcomes of developing a trustworthy AI solution, where then at the end of the day, we have a tech solution that actually enriches the lives of people and communities instead of taking from them and further excluding them in the process. So again, so that it's not it's as if I'm speaking from nowhere, it's really kind of like around the ethics of developing tech in the industry. So it's really important for us to contextualize it and realize that it's not just about an ideal world, but each there are different interpretations of ethical values that people have, and these tend to differ across jurisdictions. So there's a need for more nuanced and context-based ethical approaches to the solutions that we think about when it comes to artificial intelligence for financial inclusion. It really has to be thinking about the way in which the solution will actually enhance the society that it's being implemented in, and also really thinking about some of the challenges that are there when people are trying to translate ethics of that particular context into the communities that they are working in. And it's also, there's actually kind of a consensus of agreed upon rights, responsibilities on AI and ethics, which I've already mentioned, but I think these are quite the 8 key thematics. So when developing an AI solution that is supposed to uplift financial inclusion, it's really thinking about privacy, accountability, safety and security, transparency and explainability. And I think explainability is really, really important. And it's, again, like I said, that image that I shared about how your financial status is included. If you take 2.8 seconds to read a terms and condition, but we know for quite a lot of us, terms and conditions are still quite heavy in legal jargon, which makes it difficult for people to understand across the board. And then really thinking about that human control of technology, where sometimes you're just like, I don't know what's happening with my technology, but I guess it's serving a purpose. But then there is that removed control of the person, the responsibility and the promotion of human values at the end of the day, the dignity that is centered in the definition of financial inclusion is really that premise of like, if we're going to build an AI solution, it really has to come from this place. And this is just a finding that was done by Mozilla, where we took a look at what it means for builders who are building solutions around AI and their thoughts in the way that it works, really thinking about the lack of incentives around people doing it, the challenges in explainability. So ideally, we have this vision of what trustworthy AI could look like, but the implementation with the builders is something that we need to work on, and we really, really need to take on an ecosystem approach. And this is something that Mozilla is actually doing through its Africa Innovation Maradi work. And the reality is that financial inclusion is a huge issue for global majority countries, well, global south for other people, and particularly speaking from my positionality in an African context, with the agreement for free trade coming up, there is really this vision of like, how do we ensure that people can have increased cross-border trade, increased free movement that allows for economic growth for the continent, and technology is going to play a key part in this. So as Mozilla, what we do through this program is actually think of making the resources that we have to actually strengthen the local innovation ecosystem, so that when people are building solutions, it's not simply taking a blueprint from Silicon Valley and then plugging it into Kenya, Rwanda, South Africa, Zimbabwe. It's actually making sure that you're building something that works for the particular context and it works for people. And then it's also kind of an ecosystem intervention, which is the movement building work that my team and I do at Mozilla Foundation, where it's around bringing in the different stakeholders in the room to actually think about how do we come up with an artificial intelligence solution where everyone who's part of this ecosystem is a key player to see the solution being developed. And so this is what we've done at Mozilla Foundation through the African Ready work, where we've had a fabulous Common Voice project that actually works on building open source voice data sets that people can then build on top of to be able to create agriculture, financial inclusion, and health services. So we currently have 8 use cases in Kenya, DRC, and Tanzania, focusing on Kiswahili, where it's about creating some of the use cases are financial solutions for farmers, and particularly for women who are marginalized, to be able to use their voice to have access to information and have access to financial services. And this is all done from a basis of being community-centered. We also think about responsible computing, where it's really around ensuring that curriculum that is developed in universities with builders is actually responsible. We also invest in leadership through fellowships, where we think that it cannot just be Mozilla's responsibility to ensure trustworthy AI, but it's about people who are part of the ecosystem. And noting that my time is almost running out, I think these are the key issues and considerations that I'll leave you with that I think are really important in terms of thinking about AI for purposes of around financial inclusion. But I really want to lift up the need to center community in the design and practice, followed by the regulation, followed by bringing in the different stakeholders and incorporating the ethical practices. Because at the end of the day, we run the risk of just building solutions for people, and they become unsustainable because people don't understand them. So we actually have to work with communities in order for us to figure out what is the best intervention that allows for sustained financial inclusion, so that it's not just a once-off experience. And on that note, I thank you so much.